October 25, 1944. 0847 hours. The skies above Leyte Gulf. A Bristol Beaufighter MK.X, call sign Reaper 7, intercepted what naval commanders would later describe as the most revolutionary threat in naval warfare history. The pilot didn't know it yet, but his four 20mm Hispano cannons were about to fire the opening shots in a battle that would determine whether Japan's ultimate desperation weapon could succeed. In the next 11 months, Japan would launch 6,900 kamikaze pilots at Allied fleets. The Beaufighter squadrons standing between those pilots and their targets would write one of aviation history's most remarkable defensive campaigns, a story of firepower, radar technology, and split-second decisions that saved thousands of sailors' lives. The weapon that would force Allied naval forces to completely redesign their defensive doctrine made its debut on October 25, 1944, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf. At 1,049 hours, according to USS St. Louis deck log, a Japanese S-6M0 fighter deliberately crashed into the escort carrier's flight deck. The Kamikaze, Divine Wind, had arrived. Vice Admiral Takajiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, had authorized the formation of the first official kamikaze units on October 19, 1944. His reasoning was documented in captured Imperial Japanese Navy records. Conventional attacks achieved hit rates of approximately 2 to 5% against Allied ships defended by modern anti-aircraft systems. A deliberately crashed aircraft carrying a 250-kilogram bomb had a theoretical hit rate approaching 50%. The mathematics of desperation had created a new weapon. Japan's industrial capacity could no longer replace trained pilots at the rate they were being lost. Aviation fuel reserves were critically depleted. Aircraft production had fallen to levels that could not sustain conventional operations. But the empire still possessed approximately 10,000 aircraft and tens of thousands of young men willing to die for their emperor. Admiral Onishi's proposal to Fleet Admiral Somu Toyoda outlined the strategic logic captured in Naval General Staff documents recovered after the war: one aircraft, one pilot, one ship. We can trade what we have in abundance, the willingness to die, for what the Americans value most, the lives of their sailors and the ships that carry them. The first Special Attack Unit, known as the Shimpu Tokubetsu Kogekai, commenced operations with 26 pilots on October 25. By day's end, they had sunk the escort carrier USS St. Louis, damaged 5 other carriers, and forced Allied naval commanders to confront a weapon that conventional defensive measures struggled to counter. The tactical problem facing Allied forces was unprecedented. Traditional anti-aircraft doctrine assumed attacking aircraft would attempt to survive their attacks. Gun crews could predict flight paths based on self-preservation instincts. Kamikaze pilots eliminated that predictability. They would fly through defensive fire, accepting damage that would force conventional pilots to abort, continuing toward their targets until physical destruction or impact. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific, the signals intelligence organization, began intercepting Japanese communications about special attack units in early November 1944. Translation teams working with captured documents identified the scope of Japan's commitment. Imperial General Headquarters had authorized the Naval Air Service to organize large-scale kamikaze operations. The Army Air Service would soon follow. By November 15, 1944, Allied intelligence estimated Japan had committed approximately 650 aircraft to kamikaze missions in the Philippines campaign. Damage reports documented 6 ships sunk and 40 damaged. The hit rate exceeded 30%, 15 times better than conventional attacks. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief Pacific Fleet, sent an urgent dispatch to all fleet commanders on November 20. Suicide attacks represent the most serious threat to naval operations since the advent of naval aviation. All commands will develop countermeasures as highest priority. The weapon that would provide the answer was already operational in the Southwest Pacific, flying patrols most naval planners didn't yet understand would become the most critical defensive missions of the war. The Bristol Beaufighter had entered service with RAF Coastal Command in 1940 as a long-range heavy fighter, but by late 1944, it had evolved into something the Japanese kamikaze planners had not anticipated: a radar-equipped strike fighter with devastating firepower specifically optimized for intercepting low-flying aircraft over water. Number 31 Squadron RAF, operating from Mingalaidan Airfield near Rangoon, had received the first Beaufighter MK.X aircraft in March 1944. The variant represented a significant evolution from earlier models. Technical specifications documented by the Air Ministry showed the improvements that would prove crucial against kamikaze attacks. The armament was formidable. 420mm Hispanol MK.2 cannons mounted in the lower fuselage delivered a combined rate of fire approaching 2,400 rounds per minute. Each cannon fired explosive shells weighing 130 grams at a muzzle velocity of 880 meters per second. The shells contained a mixture of high explosive and incendiary compounds that detonated on impact. 6.303 Browning machine guns in the wings supplemented the cannon armament, adding another 7,200 rounds per minute to the total firepower. When all weapons fired simultaneously, the Beaufighter could place approximately 9,600 projectiles per minute into a target area. But the weapon system that made the Beaufighter uniquely effective against kamikaze attacks was the AIMK.8 radar housed in the distinctive thimble nose radome. The radar could detect aircraft at ranges up to 5 miles in ideal conditions and maintain tracking to within 400 feet. For the first time, fighters could locate and intercept targets in poor visibility, at night, or against the confusion of ocean backgrounds that made visual detection nearly impossible. Squadron Leader James Harrington, commanding No. 211 Squadron operating from Cocos Islands, described the tactical advantage in his after-action report dated January 12, 1945. The combination of radar detection and heavy cannon armament provides capabilities specifically suited to countering low-altitude attacks. We can detect incoming aircraft before they reach visual range and deliver decisive firepower in the brief engagement window available. The Beaufighter's two Bristol Hercules 17 radial engines, each producing 1,770 horsepower, gave the aircraft a maximum speed of 330 miles per hour at sea level, fast enough to intercept most Japanese attack aircraft. The range of 1,470 miles allowed extended patrol stations far from base, creating defensive perimeters that could engage kamikazes before they reached naval formations. By December 1944, the Royal Air Force and Royal Australian Air Force operated approximately 240 Beaufighters across the Pacific Theater. The aircraft equipped 16 squadrons assigned to various commands: RAF Coastal Command units in Burma and the Bay of Bengal, RAF squadrons in the Southwest Pacific, and specialized units supporting British Pacific Fleet operations. The aircraft had proven effective in anti-shipping strikes, ground attack missions, and convoy protection. But naval liaison officers working with Air Command Southeast Asia were beginning to recognize the Beaufighter's potential for a mission that would soon become desperate: defending fleets against an enemy willing to die to sink a single ship. The first deliberate deployment of Beaufighters specifically for kamikaze defense occurred on December 8, 1944, when No. 177 Squadron was assigned to provide radar picket coverage for Royal Navy carriers operating off the Arakan coast. Within weeks, the concept would expand across the entire theater as kamikaze attacks intensified. January 6, 1945. 0623 hours. Lingayen Gulf, Philippines. Flight Lieutenant Robert Thornton, piloting Beaufighter Hellhound 3 of No. 177 Squadron, detected the contact that would validate an entirely new defensive doctrine. His AIMK.8 radar operator, Sergeant William Davies, called out the contact: bogey, 270 degrees, range 4 miles, altitude Angels 2, speed 140 knots. The contact profile matched intelligence reports of kamikaze approach patterns: single aircraft, low altitude, moderate speed, heading directly toward the Allied invasion fleet anchored in Lingayen Gulf. Thornton advanced throttles and turned to intercept, following radar guidance through the pre-dawn darkness that made visual detection impossible. At 0627 hours, Thornton achieved visual contact at 1,200 yards. The target was a Yokosuka D-4 wide-duty dive bomber, identifiable by its distinctive inline engine profile. The aircraft was approximately 400 feet above the water, maintaining steady course toward the transport anchorage where 70,000 American troops were preparing to land. Thornton's combat report, filed with Air Command Forward and preserved in RAF Historical Branch archives, documented the engagement, close to 600 yards astern and slightly below. Pilot appeared unaware of our presence. Open fire with all guns at 0628:15. Observed strikes along fuselage and wing route. Target exploded after approximately 2-second burst. No evasive action attempted. Wreckage impacted water at 0628:22. The entire engagement from radar detection to destruction lasted less than 6 minutes. The Kamikaze pilot never saw the Beaufighter that killed him. He never had the opportunity to reach his target. The defensive concept that would save thousands of lives had been proven. Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, commanding 7th Fleet, had positioned Beaufighters from 3 squadrons, numbers 177, 211, and 31, in radar picket stations surrounding Leyte Gulf. The aircraft maintained continuous coverage, with at least 4 Beaufighters airborne at all times, creating overlapping radar detection zones extending 50 miles from the fleet. Between January 6 and January 13, 1945, Japanese forces launched approximately 430 kamikaze sorties against Leyte Gulf according to Imperial Japanese Navy records captured after the war. U.S. Navy action reports documented 24 ships hit by kamikazes during this period, with significant damage to multiple vessels. But RAF and RAF Beaufighter squadrons claimed 47 confirmed kamikaze kills during the same period, verified through multiple sources including radar tracking data, visual confirmation from ships, and wreckage recovery. Number 177 Squadron alone accounted for 19 confirmed kills. The kill-to-sortie ratio revealed the weapon's effectiveness. Beaufighter pilots engaging kamikazes before they reached the fleet achieved destruction rates exceeding 80%. Once a radar-equipped Beaufighter detected a kamikaze outside visual range from the fleet, the attacking aircraft's chances of survival dropped dramatically. Wing Commander Harold Preston, RAF liaison officer with 7th Fleet, submitted a tactical assessment on January 15 that would influence naval air defense planning for the remainder of the war. Radar-equipped heavy fighters positioned on picket stations provide the most effective defense against suicide attacks. Early detection allows interception before kamikazes reach ships' defensive gun envelopes. Recommend maximum deployment of suitable aircraft for fleet defense operations. The concept would expand rapidly as kamikaze attacks intensified through the winter and spring of 1945. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. April 1, 1945. Operation Iceberg, the invasion of Okinawa, commenced with the largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War. The Japanese response would be equally unprecedented. Imperial General Headquarters had authorized Operation Kikusui, meaning floating chrysanthemum, a series of massive kamikaze strikes designed to destroy the invasion fleet. Between April 6 and June 22, 1945, Japan would launch 10 major Kikusui operations involving 1,465 kamikaze aircraft according to Japanese Naval Air Force records preserved in the National Institute for Defense Studies in Tokyo. The scale dwarfed all previous kamikaze campaigns combined. Number 22 Squadron RAF, equipped with 16 Beaufighters, deployed to Okinawa on April 3 from their base at Morotai. Squadron leader Edward Pemberton received orders that defined a mission with stark clarity. Your aircraft will maintain continuous radar picket coverage on bearing 270 degrees from Point BOLO, range 40 miles. Intercept and destroy all unidentified aircraft approaching the fleet. Rules of engagement: weapons free on all contacts. The Beaufighter squadrons, now including numbers 22, 31, 177, 211, and newly arrived number 455 RAF, established a defensive network unprecedented in naval aviation history. At any given time during daylight hours, between 12 and 16 Beaufighters maintained patrol stations in a semicircle extending 30 to 50 miles from the invasion beaches. April 6, 1945, marked the first Kikusui operation. Japanese forces launched 355 kamikaze aircraft and 341 escort fighters in coordinated waves designed to overwhelm defensive systems. U.S. Navy action reports documented the most intense aerial combat of the Pacific War. The Beaufighter squadrons faced the tests they had been preparing for. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Garrett of No. 455 Squadron filed a combat report that captured the intensity. Between 14:45 and 16:20 hours, my aircraft intercepted and engaged 6 separate contacts. All were identified as kamikaze attacks based on flight profiles and continued approach despite warning fire. Destroyed 3 confirmed, 1 probable. Expended full cannon ammunition load and 4,200 rounds. .303. Returned to base with battle damage from return fire from escorts. The statistics from April 6 reveal both the scale of the attack and the effectiveness of the Beaufighter defense. Japanese records indicate 355 kamikaze sorties launched. U.S. Navy reports documented 22 ships hit by kamikazes. Beaufighter squadrons claimed 73 confirmed aerial victories. The mathematics of interception demonstrated the weapon's value. Each kamikaze destroyed by Beaufighters at the picket line represented a ship that would not be hit, sailors who would not die, and mission capability preserved. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commanding the amphibious forces, calculated that Beaufighter interceptions during the first Kikusui operation prevented an estimated 50 to 70 additional ship casualties. But the campaign revealed vulnerabilities. Beaufighters could not be everywhere simultaneously. Japanese tactics evolved to include multiple simultaneous approaches from different vectors, attempting to saturate the defensive coverage. Kamikaze pilots began timing attacks for dawn and dusk when radar detection remained effective but visual identification became difficult. The second Kikusui operation on April 12 deployed 185 kamikazes. Beaufighter squadrons claimed 34 kills, but 12 ships were hit. Among the casualties was the destroyer USS Manard L. Abel, the first ship sunk by a rocket-powered Oka kamikaze weapon that proved too fast for Beaufighter interception. The intensity of Okinawa operations drove rapid tactical and technical evolution. By late April 1945, Beaufighter squadrons had accumulated combat experience that transformed their effectiveness against kamikaze attacks. Air Technical Intelligence units working with crashed kamikaze wreckage made a critical discovery documented in reports dated April 18, 1945. Analysis of Zero and Oscar fighter remains revealed that pilots had removed armor plating and self-sealing fuel tanks to increase speed and fuel capacity. The modifications made kamikaze aircraft more vulnerable to cannon fire than standard fighters. Squadron armament officers immediately adjusted cannon ammunition loads based on this intelligence. The standard Beaufighter ammunition belt mixed high-explosive incendiary rounds with armor-piercing rounds in a 3-to-1 ratio. Against unarmored kamikazes, pure HEI loads proved more effective, creating catastrophic structural damage with fewer hits required. Flight Lieutenant Charles Henderson of No. 31 Squadron documented the effect in his May 2 combat report. Engaged kamikaze identified as Zero fighter at 800 yards range. Fired 4-second burst, approximately 160 rounds total. Target disintegrated completely, both wings separating from fuselage. Previous engagements against armored fighters required sustained fire. Modified ammunition proves highly effective against kamikaze construction. The tactical evolution proved equally significant. Wing Commander Preston, now assigned as Senior RAF Liaison Officer with 5th Fleet, worked with squadron commanders to develop the Barrier Patrol Doctrine formalized in Air Command Pacific Tactical Memorandum dated April 25, 1945. The doctrine established overlapping patrol zones at 3 ranges from the fleet: outer barrier at 50 miles, middle barrier at 30 miles, and inner barrier at 15 miles. Beaufighters patrolled the outer and middle barriers, with carrier-based fighters covering the inner zone. The system created multiple interception opportunities, with radar handoffs between patrol zones ensuring continuous tracking. Radio procedures evolved to provide ships with advance warning. When Beaufighters detected inbound contacts, they broadcast standardized alerts using the flash priority code that gave ships maximum time to prepare defenses. Fleet action reports indicated flash warnings from Beaufighters provided ships with an average of 8 to 12 minutes advance notice, enough time to increase speed, begin evasive maneuvers, and bring all weapons to full readiness. The Beaufighters' radar capabilities proved particularly valuable during the night kamikaze operations that Japan increasingly employed. On the night of May 3 to 4, during the 4th Kikusui operation, Japanese forces launched 125 kamikaze sorties under cover of darkness, assuming reduced defensive effectiveness. Number 211 Squadron, specially trained in night interception, destroyed 14 confirmed kamikazes during darkness hours when visual detection was impossible. Flight Lieutenant David Morrison's combat report described engaging in destroying 3 separate kamikazes between 02:45 and 04:15 hours using only radar guidance, visual contact achieved only in final moments before firing. Without radar detection and tracking, these aircraft would have reached the fleet undetected. Maintenance crews worked under enormous pressure. Each Beaufighter flew an average of 4 to 6 sorties daily during peak Kikusui operations. Cannon barrels required replacement after approximately 2,000 rounds. Engines operated beyond normal service intervals. Ground crews performed miracles of improvisation, cannibalizing damaged aircraft to keep operational planes flying. By mid-May, the Beaufighter force at Okinawa had grown to 87 operational aircraft across 7 squadrons. The commitment reflected recognition at the highest command levels that radar-equipped heavy fighters provided the most effective kamikaze defense available. By late May 1945, the Beaufighter squadrons defending Okinawa had been in continuous combat operations for 7 weeks. The physical and psychological toll on aircrews began manifesting in ways that concerned medical officers and squadron commanders. RAF Medical Branch reports from forward medical units dated May 28, 1945, documented alarming statistics. Among Beaufighter pilots at Okinawa, 37% showed symptoms of combat fatigue including tremors, insomnia, and impaired judgment. The rate significantly exceeded that observed in fighter pilots flying shorter, less intensive missions. Squadron Medical Officer Flight Lieutenant James Aldridge, attached to No. 177 Squadron, submitted a detailed assessment explaining the unique stresses. Pilots fly 4 to 6 sorties daily, each lasting 2 to 3 hours. They maintain constant vigilance watching radar displays in confined cockpits. Each contact could be a kamikaze requiring split-second decisions. The cumulative stress of multiple daily engagements, combined with knowledge that every missed intercept could result in a ship being hit and hundreds of sailors killed, creates psychological pressure unlike typical fighter operations. The loss rates among Beaufighter crews remained relatively low, approximately 3% per month, but the nature of losses affected morale. Most aircraft were not shot down by enemy fighters but by return fire from kamikaze escorts, mechanical failures from overstressed engines, or simple exhaustion-induced pilot error. Flight Lieutenant Robert Hayes of No. 31 Squadron was killed on May 11 when his Beaufighter crashed on approach after his 6th sortie of the day. The accident investigation determined Hayes had fallen asleep on final approach. He had flown 47 combat hours in the previous 8 days. Yet the crews understood the necessity. Destroyer picket ships stationed beyond the Beaufighter patrol zones suffered devastating casualties. USS Luce, USS Morrison, USS Drexler, and 13 other destroyers were sunk by kamikazes that penetrated the outer defenses. Survivors rescued from these ships often visited Beaufighter squadrons to personally thank the crews for their protection. Petty Officer Harold Williams, rescued from USS Drexler after a kamikaze attack on May 28, wrote in a letter preserved in the Imperial War Museum, "We watched the Beaufighters patrolling overhead all day every day. Whenever we saw one of them shoot down a kamikaze, we cheered. We knew every kill they made was one less plane trying to hit us. When that kamikaze got through and hit our ship, I didn't blame the fighters. I knew they were doing everything humanly possible. I owe my life to those crews. The kamikaze pilots themselves left evidence of their awareness of the Beaufighter threat. Captured documents from the 203rd Air Group, recovered after the war, included tactical instructions dated May 1, 1945. Allied radar-equipped night fighters patrol between 30 to 50 miles from fleet. These aircraft are extremely dangerous. They can detect our aircraft before visual range. Pilots should fly at minimum altitude, use cloud cover when available, and approach from multiple directions simultaneously to divide defensive coverage. Japanese recognition of Beaufighter effectiveness represented the ultimate validation. The weapon had forced enemy tactical adaptation, the clearest indication that a defense system was working. By June 1, when organized Japanese resistance on Okinawa ended, Beaufighter squadrons had flown over 12,000 combat sorties and claimed 318 confirmed kamikaze kills with an additional 127 probable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. On 22nd, 1945. The 10th and final Kikusui operation represented Japan's last major coordinated kamikaze effort. Imperial General Headquarters had scraped together every operational aircraft remaining in Kyushu and Formosa, approximately 110 aircraft according to Japanese Air Force records recovered post-war. The attacks would target Allied ships supporting the final phases of Okinawa operations. Number 22 Squadron RAF, now commanded by Squadron Leader Jeffrey Marshall after the original commander had been evacuated for combat fatigue, received the alert at 0545 hours. Radio intercepts from Fleet Radio Unit Pacific indicated a major attack was imminent. All available Beaufighters were scrambled to establish maximum coverage of the outer defensive barrier. Flight Lieutenant Vincent Crawford, Flying Demon 6, detected the first wave at 0612 hours. His radar operator, Sergeant Peter Mackenzie, identified multiple contacts at 45 miles range, multiple bogies, bearing 320, range 45 miles, altitude Angels 3. Estimate 20 plus aircraft. The engagement that followed represented the culmination of 9 months of tactical evolution. Crawford's combat report, one of the most detailed filed during the Okinawa campaign, described the action, vector to intercept lead formation. Achieve visual contact at 0618 at range 2,000 yards. Formation consisted of approximately 15 aircraft, Zeros, Oscars, and several twin-engine Betty bombers. All appeared to be kamikaze configured based on visible ordnance loads and flight profiles. Engaged lead 0 at 800 yards, fired 3-second burst. Target exploded. Immediately transitioned to second 0, destroyed with 2-second burst. Third engagement against Oscar fighter, target caught fire and descended into ocean. Fourth engagement against Betty bomber, concentrated fire on port engine, aircraft rolled inverted and crashed. Expended all cannon ammunition. Returned to base at 0647 hours. Across the defensive perimeter, similar engagements unfolded. The Beaufighter squadrons, now numbering 94 operational aircraft, created an aerial barrier that Japanese formations could not penetrate intact. Radio logs preserved in RAF Historical Branch archives capture the intensity. 0615 hours, Reaper 3 engaging multiple contacts, bearing 310. 0618 hours, Hellhound 5, Splash 2, engaging third. 0623 hours, Demon 8, Winchester, 3 confirmed kills, returning to base. 0629 hours, Satan 2, engine damage from return fire, attempting to reach friendly territory. By 0730 hours, the attack had been broken. Of approximately 110 Japanese aircraft launched, Beaufighter squadrons claimed 45 confirmed kills. Carrier-based fighters and ship-based anti-aircraft fire accounted for additional losses. Only 8 kamikazes succeeded in reaching the fleet, resulting in minor damage to 3 ships. Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding 5th Fleet, sent a message to all Beaufighter squadrons at 0845 hours, Your performance this morning prevented what could have been a catastrophic attack on our forces. The entire fleet owes you an enormous debt. Well done. The final statistics from the Okinawa campaign revealed the magnitude of the Beaufighter contribution. Between April 1st and June 22nd, 1945, Beaufighter squadrons had flown 12,847 combat sorties, claimed 318 confirmed kamikaze kills and 127 probable kills, and lost 23 aircraft, a kill ratio exceeding 13-1. But the numbers told only part of the story. Naval analysts estimated that each kamikaze destroyed by Beaufighters before reaching the fleet saved an average of 1.4 ships from damage or sinking, based on kamikaze hit rates when defensive interception failed. The 318 confirmed kills potentially prevented 445 ship casualties. Translated into human terms, the Beaufighter defense saved an estimated 15,000 to 20,000 sailors' lives, men who would have died if those kamikazes had reached their targets. The weapon system had proven itself not just effective, but essential to naval survival in the face of Japan's ultimate desperation tactic. As organized resistance on Okinawa ended and planning began for Operation Downfall, the invasion of the Japanese home islands, Allied planners recognized that kamikaze attacks would intensify dramatically. Intelligence estimates projected Japan possessed 5,000 to 7,000 aircraft reserved specifically for kamikaze defense of the homeland. The Beaufighter squadrons would be critical to any invasion force's survival. The effectiveness of Beaufighter interceptions created psychological effects that extended far beyond the immediate tactical results. Captured Japanese documents and post-war interrogations revealed how the defensive system affected kamikaze pilots and their commanders. Lieutenant Yasuo Kuwahara, a kamikaze pilot who survived the war after his mission was cancelled, provided testimony to U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey investigators in October 1945. His account, preserved in National Archives records, described the psychological impact of the Beaufighter threat. We were told our missions were one way. We accepted death. But we were told we would die striking the enemy, taking American ships with us. The reality was different. We knew about the radar-equipped fighters patrolling far from the fleet. Many pilots never reached their targets. They died in the ocean, shot down before ever seeing an American ship. This was not the honorable death we had prepared for. Japanese naval aviation commanders recognized the problem. A tactical assessment dated May 15, 1945, recovered from the 721st Air Group's documents, acknowledged enemy radar-equipped night fighters operating at extended range from their fleet have created an effective barrier. Approximately 40% of special attack aircraft are being destroyed before reaching targets. Pilot morale is affected by knowledge that interception probability is high. Some pilots express preference for conventional attack missions where survival is possible over special attack missions where death without achieving results is likely. The mathematics of kamikaze warfare had shifted unfavorably. Without effective defensive interception, kamikaze attacks achieved hit rates of 40 to 50%. With Beaufighter barrier patrols operating effectively, hit rates dropped to 15 to 20%. Japan was trading irreplaceable pilots and aircraft for diminishing returns. Intelligence officers analyzing capture diaries found repeated references to the demon fighters or ghost planes that could find Japanese aircraft in darkness or clouds. One diary entry from Ensign Toshiro Nakamura, killed during the 8th Kikusui operation, expressed the frustration: "We fly knowing we will die. But now we fly knowing we may never reach the enemy. The Allied fighters with their electronic eyes hunt us like animals. There is no honor in being shot down far from our targets by an enemy we never see." The Beaufighter's psychological impact extended to support operations. Japanese air commanders began requiring larger escort formations to protect kamikaze attacks, diverting conventional fighters that could have been employed more effectively in other roles. Captured operational orders from June 1945 mandated 3 escort fighters for every kamikaze, a ratio that strained already depleted fighter strength. British intelligence officers working with captured documents discovered evidence that some kamikaze pilots had deliberately aborted missions, claiming mechanical failures or inability to locate targets. Squadron discipline reports from the 341st Air Group documented 5 pilots who returned from missions without engaging, claiming they had been intercepted by radar-equipped fighters and forced to evade. The reports noted skeptically that no such interceptions had been confirmed by Allied forces in those areas at those times. The phenomenon represented something unprecedented in Japanese military culture, the erosion of the warrior code under pressure from technological superiority that made sacrifice seem futile rather than glorious. Wing Commander Preston, analyzing the intelligence reports, wrote in his June assessment, "The kamikaze strategy relied on absolute willingness to die. Our radar-equipped fighters have introduced an element that undermines that willingness, not fear of death itself, but fear of meaningless death without accomplishing the mission. This psychological effect may ultimately prove as important as the physical destruction of enemy aircraft." The capture documents revealed another significant effect. Japanese training for replacement kamikaze pilots increasingly emphasized evasion techniques rather than attack techniques, extreme low-altitude flight to avoid radar detection, using weather fronts for concealment, approaching from unexpected vectors. The defensive had forced the offensive to adapt in ways that reduced effectiveness. Pilots focused on evading interception had less attention and fuel available for finding and hitting targets. By summer 1945, the combination of physical attrition and psychological erosion had fundamentally undermined Japan's kamikaze capability. August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's radio broadcast announcing Japan's surrender reached Beaufighter squadrons still maintaining defensive patrols around Allied fleets. The war was over. The kamikaze threat that had consumed their operations for 11 months had ended. The final accounting revealed the scale of the campaign. Between October 1944 and August 1945, Japan had launched approximately 6,900 kamikaze sorties according to Japanese military records compiled during the Allied occupation. These attacks sank 47 Allied ships and damaged 368 others, killing approximately 4,900 sailors and wounding over 4,800. But the Beaufighter squadron's defensive campaign had fundamentally limited what could have been catastrophic losses. RAF and RAF records documented 487 confirmed kamikaze kills by Beaufighter crews, with an additional 203 probable kills. Naval analysts calculating counterfactuals estimated that without effective radar-equipped fighter interception, kamikaze attacks would have achieved hit rates 2 to 3 times higher, potentially resulting in 150-plus ships sunk and 20,000-plus casualties. The weapon system that had proven so effective would influence military aviation for decades. The Beaufighter's combination of radar detection, heavy firepower, and extended patrol capability established a template for all subsequent naval air defense fighters. The concept evolved into the post-war jet age with aircraft like the de Havilland Venom and eventually modern carrier-based interceptors. Air Marshal Sir Keith Park, commanding RAF forces in Southeast Asia, submitted his final assessment in September 1945. The Bristol Beaufighter, employed as a radar picket fighter, proved to be one of the most significant defensive weapons of the Pacific War. The aircraft's ability to detect, intercept, and destroy kamikaze attacks before they reached our fleet saved thousands of lives and dozens of ships. The concept of radar-equipped fighters operating in barrier patrols should be retained and developed for future naval operations. The human cost of the defensive campaign was recorded in squadron casualty lists. The Beaufighter units defending against kamikazes lost 47 aircraft and 94 crewmen killed during the 11-month campaign. Squadron medical records documented that an additional 156 crew members were evacuated for combat fatigue or stress-related conditions. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Garrett, who had survived the entire Okinawa campaign flying 187 combat sorties, reflected on the experience in a 1987 interview preserved in the Imperial War Museum Oral History Collection. "We understood what we were doing. Every kamikaze we shot down was a ship that didn't get hit, sailors who went home to their families. We knew the Japanese pilots were brave men doing what their country asked. But our job was to stop them, and we did. I don't celebrate the killing, but I'm proud we saved so many lives." The kamikaze pilots who survived the war because missions were cancelled or Japan surrendered before their turns came provided their own perspectives. Yasuo Kuwahara, in his 1957 memoir, wrote, "I prepared to die for my emperor and my country. When the war ended before my mission, I felt shame at first. But years later, I understood that the Allied defenses, especially their radar-equipped fighters, had made our sacrifice largely futile. We would have died without achieving our objectives. Perhaps there is no honor in meaningless death." The annual Beaufighter Squadron reunions, held from 1946 through the 1990s, brought together the veterans who had flown the defensive campaign. Photos from these gatherings show aging men who had once hunted and killed with clinical efficiency, now remembering fallen comrades and the intensity of combat that had defined their youth. The final Beaufighter veteran from the Kamikaze defense operations, Squadron Leader Jeffrey Marshall, died in 2003 at age 84. His obituary in the Times noted, Marshall flew 203 combat sorties during the Okinawa campaign, claiming 11 confirmed kamikaze kills. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross in Bar. After the war, he rarely spoke of his experiences, saying only that he had done what needed doing. The Bristol Beaufighters' campaign against Japanese kamikaze attacks stands as one of the most effective defensive operations in military aviation history. The combination of radar technology, devastating firepower, and extended patrol capability created a defensive barrier that fundamentally altered the equation of naval warfare in the Pacific. Japan had launched 6,900 kamikaze pilots believing that absolute sacrifice would overcome technological disadvantage. The Beaufighter squadrons proved that industrial capacity, technological innovation, and tactical excellence could counter even the most determined enemy willing to trade lives for objectives. The streams of 20mm cannon fire that reached out to destroy kamikaze aircraft before they could reach Allied ships didn't just save vessels and sailors. They demonstrated a fundamental principle of modern warfare, that technological superiority, properly employed, can overcome human courage and sacrifice when the disparity becomes overwhelming. The young men who flew Beaufighters through those 11 months of intense combat saved thousands of lives they would never meet, protecting ships they would never serve on, ensuring victory in a campaign that would end the war. Their legacy endures in every modern air defense system, in every radar-guided interceptor, in every defensive concept that places technology between attackers and their targets. The war ended. The Beaufighters returned to base. The survivors went home. And thousands of Allied sailors who never knew how close they came to death lived because radar-equipped fighters had stood between them and Japan's ultimate weapon. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.